Good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are joining us today. We're so glad to have you attend this webinar with Let's Talk tonight. My name is Hannah, and I'm a current student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'll be serving as one of your moderators today. As you can see on the screen on the bottom left, our agenda today will be starting with a Student Voices video, followed by a conversation with Nora Yasumura, a student panel, and then a Q&A and a response activity. I'm ending with announcements. This webinar was organized to help professionals understand the diversity of identities and experiences and challenges that come with the Asian and Asian American identity, and specifically in how it affects student learning and mental health and growth for students. So, and especially in such a unique time as 2020 has brought us, we recognize that it's so important for us now more than ever to support our students and making them just feel seen and valued. And so we really hope that this space can be a place of learning as we lean into these stories today. So with that, we'll start with our Student Voices video that captures students from all over the world who have responded to the question, what I wish my teachers understood about me. And as we watch the video, please feel free to add any comments in the chat with what resonates with you and what thoughts are coming to mind. And yeah, we'll get started. That was such a powerful video. Special thanks to all the students who took their time to submit their responses to this video today. And with that, I would like to invite Nora Yasumura. So a little bit about Nora. She brings over 20 years of expertise working directly with Pan-Asian community, both in college and high school settings. She has in the past served as the Assistant Dean of Student Life and Pan-Asian Advisor in the Office of Pluralism and Leadership at Dartmouth College for 13 years, and currently serves as the Class Dean and director of club and affinity groups at the Hotchkiss School. So she has just worked extensively with students from different backgrounds as a national diversity consultant and conference coordinator, and is also the founder of Pan Asian Wellness Initiative. Independent School Network. And so she'll today be speaking about how the process of sharing and hearing stories can help support wellness in the Pan-Asian community with us. So welcome, Nora.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Hannah, for that introduction. And thank you for helping to, and others for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. So when I think about a little bit about my background and then what's also helped to bring me to this work, I was reflecting upon this idea that I can't remember a time I wasn't thinking about the concept of identity. Growing up in the suburbs of New York City as a multiracial person in the 70s, I often questioned who I was. Similar to many multiracial people, I lacked role models and felt forced to choose one aspect of my identity over another. And I was fortunate to have this inner voice and a lot of caring mentors who gave me permission to be both Asian American and white, even though society hadn't evolved yet to make that possible. So helping to facilitate spaces for others to think about the complexities of their own identity has always been a passion of mine. Mm-hmm. I've also spent my entire career as a social worker, very proud social worker, and an educator fighting for social justice. So part of what inspired me and to this commitment was learning that my father was incarcerated as a child in the Japanese American camps during World War II. And for him and many others, they were silenced by the trauma of this institutional act of racism. However, I have been blessed with many opportunities to raise my voice, and I'm always looking for ways to fight for social justice for all.
Thank you, Nora, for sharing a little bit about your background and how you've come to this work. So could you share a little bit with us about how the process of sharing and hearing stories with each other really helps support wellness in the Pan-Asian community?
Sure, yeah. You know, I think it's important to really appreciate and recognize how the Pan-Asian student community is made up of nuanced, complex, and ever-changing experiences. Mm-hmm. There are over 20 primary, different primary cultural, ethnic groups under this umbrella heading. And there are individuals who identify like myself as multiracial and also transnational adoptees. There are multiple generations of people who have lived in the United States. So some have only recently come here to study in the United States, or others are like myself, where I'm Sansei or third generation. And one of the growing populations I've noticed recently is how sometimes people whose parents are together might have one parent in Asia, for instance, and one parent in the United States, just because of the complexities of needing to find jobs and try to provide more opportunities for their child. So in addition to that, it's important to sort of highlight all of the intersecting core social identities within this community. And you know, we have a wide variety of people from a wide variety of socioeconomic classes and religious backgrounds, as well as individuals from different gender identities and sexual orientations and abilities.
Yeah.
So, you know, despite this richness, the ongoing invisibility of the community, both culturally and racially at our schools and in the larger society, makes it difficult for people of Asian descent to recognize all of these dimensions in a manner that fully appreciates and affirms their personal, cultural, and racial context. Mm-hmm. For instance, I invite you all to sort of pause. I invite all the sort of participants to pause for a moment and to see if you can name 3 mainstream movies or novels where the characters are of Asian descent. So go ahead and just put them in the chat if you can think of a few. I'll just pause there with you for a moment. Great, thank you. Yeah, so you can see a couple of them are just popping up. I just watched the half of it the other day on Netflix. So yeah, but as you can sort of see, it's pretty difficult. And we're seeing a lot of the same names coming up. And, you know, I think that we all need these interpersonal mirrors to have our experiences reflected and contrasted and validated especially when these experiences are unique or challenging in some manner. And when these mirrors aren't being presented, students not only miss the opportunity to explore the nuances of their own identity, there's also the danger of reinforcing the unspoken message that their cultural and racial experiences aren't worthy at all.
Mhm.
This can lead to some individuals deciding to check important aspects of themselves at the door in order to gain a sense of belonging in the larger community. So when students abandon core parts of who they are, we all lose. Storytelling helps to expand our capacity to accept ourselves and others without judgment and with humility and curiosity at the center. So inviting people to share their stories in order to listen and learn from one another normalizes this idea that we universally don't have it all figured out, because understanding our identity is dynamic and it's an evolving process that requires time and some level of vulnerability. So when we individually and collectively pause and we bear witness to those who courageously speak their truth, to how things are, not how we want them to be, our hearts just naturally open to all of the expansive possibilities of how to make sense of our own lives. And there's nothing like this moment when you say something in a large group and you notice other people's eyes getting bigger or their head nodding spontaneously to acknowledge that you've just unearthed something that needed to be said. So these aha moments, they invite curiosity and intrigue and even hope, because it helps us begin to challenge those limits of the binary and the narrow thinking that has been projected onto us by others. This is I think really important part, because you know, many students these days are facing a culture of shoulds. You should be a doctor, you should be getting straight A's, you should be studying for your SATs instead of hanging out with your friends. And many students, regardless of race, are feeling a lot of external pressure these days to meet other people's high expectations. You could see it in some of the early comments that you showed just before I had a chance to talk. And for those in the Pan Asian community, the pressure is layered or intensified when they are sent multiple cultural, sometimes mixed, contradictory, or double bind messages. And when people feel, when feelings of dissonance or tensions are not contextualized or named, but are felt, it's easy for someone to internalize that what they're sensing is a result of their own deficiency or failures rather than because of the complex cultural or racial circumstances.
Mhm.
And as a result, some may struggle in silence and believe that they're the only ones going through this experience. And this can lead to unconscious feelings of shame, self-doubt, or even isolation. So storytelling, which serves to counterbalance this perception, provides the space, and I would, perhaps the most importantly, it provides the permission for a more compassionate view of ourselves and others.
Mhm.
Another topic that I wanted to highlight is the importance of talking about the model minority myth, which is the stereotype that all people of Asian descent are quiet or polite or wealthy, hardworking, good at math. And so even though we've been talking about this concept for decades, this damaging false belief and overgeneralization is still alive and very present within many schools. And in my experience, it's rarely openly discussed or challenged institutionally. So as a result, resources, outreach efforts, and creation of vital affinity spaces, the recruitment of Pan Asian adults, and the teachings of Asian American history are limited or even non-existent. In addition, the racial issues and concerns unique to the Pan Asian community may also be left out of the diversity, equity, inclusion strategy of the school. This is at the same time, as someone mentioned earlier, that the research is showing that the rates of bullying and acts of hate towards people of Asian descent are on the rise.
Yeah.
Opens up the likelihood that when, not if, students of Asian descent face microaggressions, which is like 1,000 cuts of discrimination, or experience overt acts of oppression, they will be less likely to come forward and talk about it with others. When any act of hatred is left unchallenged, we all lose. For Pan Asian students who are newer to living in the US, acts of racial discrimination may be
Mhm.
especially disorienting, because it often is the first time that they're they're directly faced with being racialized. And for some, they may feel the impact of racism, but that because they don't have the name for it, or they don't have words for it, they don't maybe understand the historical dynamics behind it, they aren't sure how to make sense of the interaction. So nonetheless, the judgment and the aggression towards them still can activate the nervous system. And without intentional spaces to process what's happened and how it's impacted them personally, there's nowhere for this toxic energy to go. When students feel forced to swallow the injustices they face, we all lose. However, providing meaningful and authentic connections in a non-judgmental manner and an empowering manner, just like we're doing today, can transform these instances into powerful moments of growth for all. Not only growth for the individual, but also growth for everyone around them and growth for the institution. When we commit ourselves to raising the visibility of the Pan-Asian community and admire all of the rich and diverse experiences they add to our schools, as well as address the unique needs they face, we all benefit. And so that's why I'm really, it's just a pleasure to be here. And I really appreciate all the educators who've come on this Saturday or Sunday morning, if you're in a different time zone, to attend this webinar. And I'm also looking forward to hearing from the panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this topic and setting the groundwork for today's student panelists. We are so excited to have such an amazing lineup of students who will be able to share their stories with us. And just check here. Yeah, so if we can invite the student panelists up, on the screen you can see a little bit of background from where these students are coming from today. You can just turn on videos. Yeah, welcome student panelists. Why don't we start with introductions? Let's see, Thomas, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Hi, my name is Thomas Tran. I'm a high school senior at Boston Latin School, actually. And I'm calling today from Boston, Massachusetts, specifically Dorchester. Oh, and I'm Asian American.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Victor. I'm 22 years old and I just graduated from Gordon College with a major in business administration. And I'm currently calling from Boston. And I'm an international student and a third cultural kid.
Oh, Finn, sorry, I think your mic is, no.
Oh, does it work now?
Yep, it's working.
All right, sorry about that. Hi, my name is Finn Fujimura. I'm a junior at Westview High School. And I'm currently calling from Portland, Oregon, and I'm a Japanese American.
Hi, I'm Joy Taylor. I am a recent grad from Covenant College. I'm currently calling from Boston, and I'm an international student, well, international TCK biracial person.
Thanks, Joy.
Hi everyone, my name is Jing Yi Zhang and I'm a graduate student at Harvard School of Education now. And I'm currently calling from Guangzhou, China, and I'm an international student.
Great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to be here and to share your stories with us. So we'll get started with our first question. The first question is, can you share about your experiences in reckoning with cultural dissonances or stereotypes or instances of being othered as an Asian or Asian American student?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So some background, I am Asian American. I was born in America. However, my family really wanted me to have roots in my culture. So I actually learned Cantonese as my first language. So in second grade, I was put in ESL, English as a second language, where I had some struggles with English. So I had a special class for it and it was all good. However, my main teacher in second grade didn't really, like, as soon as she saw that I was put in ESL, she didn't really expect much from me because I was in ESL. I couldn't have known in her eyes, and it really ruined my perception of school. because there was contrasting encouragement from school in my home, where at home, my parents pushed me to succeed and get good grades. But at school, I was told that it was okay not to try hard. And it wasn't in like, take some breaks. It's okay to take some breaks, but it was almost as if like, no matter what I do, I wouldn't get better regardless. So I should just stop trying. And it took me a really long time to break out of that mindset. And it wasn't until around high school that I actually started like reshaping my mindset into like how I should perceive myself at school and at home, and where my priorities lay at, like with grades and whatnot. And then in high school at BLS, the population is predominantly white, with about 46 to 47% of all students being white. And there are many aspects of the school where the Asians there don't feel like they can really approach. Like, for example, lacrosse or football, there's almost no Asians on the team. And we had to really there's now, so in order to like counteract that with like a safe space for Asians to go to, there's their own cliques like volleyball or whatnot. And yeah, that's just one of the things we have to deal with, and it's kind of normalized because no one really talks about it, but it's definitely a glaring issue because I feel like some Asians want to pursue something, but they feel like if they try, they would just get shut down immediately. And then from some stereotypes that have been incorrectly held up to me, I am not great at math. I had to do a lot of extra help on the side. And in doing that, I got a lot better. So I was a little bit of ahead due to Kumon. But when I started to really struggle with math during 8th grade or in the high school years, I found it really difficult to reach out for help. But it was almost like discouraged, not only by like, I wouldn't say it's discouraged by the teachers, but by the peers. It's like, you're Asian and you need help with math. Like you're not Asian, you're not truly Asian. And it really like stressed me out. I had a lot of like breakdowns because I couldn't understand the math, and I felt like it was wrong for me to reach out for help. And yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, but I'm Indian. So speaking of cultural dishonesties that I faced in America was mostly, I don't have a specific story, but just in general, like what I've learned is as soon as I reached America, I definitely did face a culture shock, because I wasn't aware and I didn't understand the American culture and how people function here, or like the American lifestyle. So that was all very new to me, and it was just um, 4 years of my college journey just trying to learn and understand and navigate through that and kind of adjust some stereotypes that have been held up to me. People just look at my face and think I'm like brown, I'm Indian, and then assume that I grew up poor. Or when I mention that I'm born and raised in Dubai, they expect me to be super rich. So just like coming across people that don't ask the right questions to really understand me for me. Yeah, so that's just some of the experiences that I've faced with cultural dishonesties. I've never faced a negative situation from a professor or a teacher. Um, but it's mostly just being misunderstood by my peers. But that's it. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Jess.
Oh yeah, so I'll go next. So one big example for me for this question is when we're learning about World War II in school. So obviously, the events Pearl Harbor, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki happened. And as someone who's half Japanese and half Caucasian, it was a very awkward experience for me. So when the bombings of Japan are first brought up in class, a lot of my peers would, kind of look at me. They kind of like say, "What's Finn gonna say? What is he gonna think about this since he's Japanese?" And it was a very awkward moment for me. And, this isn't everyone's experience in the US education system, but personally, we were told that America's always the good guy and that the US always did the right thing. And then when I would go to Japan and I would see that the shrines of my great grandpa and my great grandma in my grandparents' house because they died from the bombing of Hiroshima. And I go to the Hiroshima Museum and I see the devastating effects that it had and the fact that my family is still recovering from those bombings. It made me feel like I shouldn't even be like proud of my heritage. It made me feel like, um, that this Japanese side of me isn't right. And then I'm told that the US did the right thing, but then I see all this stuff happening in Japan and it's very tearing for me. Kind of made me like, oh, maybe I want to be full white or something like that. And then it also kind of brought up the thing with my peers is that, there's names, something like like nuke eater or like Jap is, some slurs or insults that you can be called. And, it just created a lot of almost hatred for myself for being Japanese because we're learning from these textbooks that are 20, 30 years old that are very biased. And we never learned about Japanese internment camps in America or any of these things that we did. We only learned that, oh, they attacked first. And then we're given this false dichotomy that the USA had to attack Japan or millions of like American lives would be lost. And yeah, that was a really big sort of moment, especially since we're learning about that in middle school and I haven't matured yet to know like, and I'm not doing my own research. It made me think that, my people were bad and they did something terrible and that I should like reprimand that.
A little background. I grew up in Asia, so for me, being a biracial person, I would walk around and everyone would like, oh, like, I look like a foreigner in Asia. They're like, oh, can I touch your hair? Can I take pictures? And that was just very much like from the beginning, I was viewed as a foreigner in a land that I was born in. And then and being viewed as a foreigner and being like viewed as a white person in Asia and having that mentality thinking, oh yeah, I'm a white person, and going to America and realizing that like that is not at all my I don't have like I have no understanding of what true American culture is like, and especially studying in the South, um, the amount of representation around me was just I could count with my hands about all the Asians in my school. So like that transition and like going from a place where I was known as the other and then entering into a place where I thought that wouldn't be the other, but ended up being feeling even more like the other because I'm visible in the sense of I can blend in, and like when people see me, they don't automatically think that I am not from the States. So like just the stereotype of like, oh, like kind of like, oh, why don't you know this kind of stuff? Where like just like wanting to be able to blend in, but not really fully understanding how to blend in, and like appearing maybe like more Asian in America, but then appearing more foreign in Asia, and just the struggle of like my biracialness and like my multiculturalness is like something that like I just had to deal with. Like that identity crisis is a never ending process, and dealing with like, oh, how do I deal with certain social chain like social problems as a half white person, or how is that viewed as an Asian person, where we're told to just like not say anything and just don't cause problems because you don't want to make stir up problems for other people. So like those are just some of the common things that I had to face being a biracial person in both Asia and the States.
Thank you, Joy, for sharing.
Thank you for everyone sharing. So a little bit background about myself. I am born and raised in Guangzhou, China, and I have been an international student for the past 8 years, starting my high school in Santa Barbara, California, and then finished my undergraduate degree at Boston College, and now finishing my graduate degree at Harvard. I think some expectations and a different message from my family and the culture when I first came to the US was first, a lot of it is more expectations about myself, because when I came in at 16, um, I think that my parents provide all the financial support for me, so I need to study hard, and all the others like study hard, not going to parties, but those are not fitting the cultural norms at the time when I was attending my high school and undergraduate. It was a bit hard for me to kind of still do my own thing and then seeing the culture going on and feeling that I do not belong to the place I studied. And some stereotypes I think of affect the most of me. First is being the stereotype of being quiet in the classroom, and how that a lot of people would think maybe because we come in as international students, we have a good language proficiency, but that doesn't mean that we have the cultural norms. For example, in the classroom, sometimes when a professor asks a question, in my Chinese culture and my Chinese education system, we are asked to formulate our thoughts in our head fully before answering a question, but that rather is not the case in the classroom in the US. So whenever I finish my thoughts in my head, then the question already passed and then it's the next question. So that also lead to my low participation rate in most of my classes, because I didn't get to participate. So it's not about I am quiet in the classroom, it's about I do not know when and how I could speak up. And another thing is more, I guess, something that I feel other was I started embracing my real Chinese name this year as a graduate student. But before, for the past 7 years before that, I was using the name Brittany because I want to be seen more Americanized. And I actually picked the name from the show American Next Top Model, season 2, the champion of that show, season 2. But the most ironic thing is when my parents attended my high school graduations, my teachers and everyone keep calling me Brittany, and they have no idea who I am. So that was the point that I figured out that I need to start embracing. But when I attended Boston College, which is also predominantly white, I kind of scared that I'm not seen as one of them. So I was still using my name Brittany at a time. But now I'm back in my country and then doing my virtual school. So I started using Jingyi. But I could see how that I have like two identities that does not relate to each other.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jingyi, and all the student panelists, just for opening up your stories and allowing us to lean into that. Thank you so much. And and along with that question, the next one, the follow-up would be, what kind of resources or experiences have helped you gain a better understanding of your cultural and racial identity, whether in high school or college or currently?
So in 8th grade, I actually went to the Richard J. Murphy, and the assistant headmaster or assistant principal there, Mr. Gilliam, was super open. He was always up in people's businesses, but in like a good way. He just like checked up on everybody to see how they were doing, regardless of who it was. And I remember when Trump got elected, it was a very unnaturally quiet day. A large majority of my school was Black and Latino, and specifically Vietnamese Americans, because it was Dorchester. And so he kind of told everybody to stop what they were doing, and we all filed into this classroom and we sat in a circle, and he just told everybody to let everybody like share out what they were feeling, because he knew that it was a tough time, and he knew that some of us had emotions that we couldn't really cope with. And it started with one person, but soon everybody started talking and people started crying, and everything just flooded out. And in that like hour to hour and a half, like I created like I didn't necessarily create bonds, but I felt safe with everybody that was there. You know, there was no one teasing each other. There was no bullying because everyone was feeling the same thing. Everyone felt like how distressed it was and what a dire situation it was for some of the people in the room. And then when I hit high school, actually, there was more Asian American teachers there, and my assistant headmaster, Miss Kwan, she's super cool. And I didn't really meet her till later on into my high school career, but I remember specifically I was preparing for an event for my club, BLS Asia, and we were celebrating the Lunar New Year. And I went down to her and I was like, Miss Kwan, do you have a mahjong table? And and when I asked her, she was like, "Yeah, of course I do. Do you guys need to borrow it?" And we were like, "Yeah, yes, please. We should have everybody feel included." And she was like, "Here, it's in my trunk." And she gave me her car keys, and I went to grab her portable mahjong set that was in her trunk, and and then we just went our separate ways. But it was such a cool experience because she had a mahjong table in her trunk. It was like it was so cool to me, and she spoke Cantonese too. And like at that point I was like, dang, I can really I really trust this lady because she's just like so in tune with her Asian Asian American self. And then another experience with another experience with our staff at school was Mr. Liu, who I know is present today. Hi, Mr. Liu. He is our new Asian American guidance counselor, and my previous guidance counselor had retired because no, she just retired, and I had her for about 3 years. And in those 3 years I kind of struggled to make a bond with her, but we had introductories, like interviews, one-on-ones with our new guidance counselor, Mr. Liu. And in that 45 to an hour, I knew Mr. Liu knew more about me than my previous guidance counselor did. It's because there was just so many unspoken things. Like I would say something and he would immediately get it because he had gone through the exact same experience. He knew the significance of my work. He knew what I was passionate about and he related to it. And that's why I feel like representation is so important in like school staff, because in my previous schools, I attended a Malden school and then a private school, a private Catholic school. I never had this bond with any of this like staff there. But like seeing people that look like me and who relate to me so much just means so much. And also another shout out to Mr. Chen, who is also here. I don't actually have a lot of experience or interaction with him, but I know that many of my Asian friends do. And they're like, because he served on the Office of Equity and he just has the trust of many students.
So much for sharing, Thomas. It's really resonant.
So some of the experiences that has helped me gain a better understanding of my culture and racial identity was at, at my time at Gordon College. There was an organization called International Student Organization that was led by the students, and ever since like orientation till the end, till the very end, I really felt that the community at Gordon College made each and every international student feel at home, feel welcomed. And that was mainly due to the way our you could say our leader, like director of everything, really just poured her heart into creating events and um, like just activities for students to get together, create a safe space so we can just watch movies together, or just like play games together on a Friday night, or things like that, where students just really had a safe place to feel at home and had people that they could talk to and they related to. So the whole experience of being an international student for a year um, really made me feel like um, Gordon was a good place for me. And then eventually made me feel like America could be a good place for me. Then another resource was taking a class at Gordon College called Globalization and Social Change that was taught by Dr. Ivy George. Um, that class really opened my eyes to just understanding um, racial and cultural identity of people from all over the world, be it like Africa, Europe, and India as well. So we read books of individuals and their experiences during colonization, and individuals that had to move countries and adjust to life in America. So just learning and soaking in all that knowledge from that class opened my eyes and educated me to just understand my cultural and racial identity, but also the situations and the difficulties that other people that do look like me or don't look like me, what they could potentially be going through. So yeah, those
Mm,
are some of the experiences that helped me.
thanks, Jess, for sharing.
All right. So it's my turn now. Unfortunately, for this question, I've never really exactly had some sort of resource or help from a school or like school board or teacher. So I guess to give a little bit of context, even though it's seen as really progressive now, Oregon and specifically Portland, Oregon has had a very racist past, including white supremacy and a ton of things. But after a lot of that happened, sort of like another thing is that the Nike World headquarters is in Beaverton, and there's a large Intel headquarters here. So that created a lot of jobs, and a lot of immigrants came here, mainly Asian actually. So I actually have a lot of Asian and Indian peers, but unfortunately, almost every teacher I have had is white or Caucasian, and they didn't know how to teach like Asian and immigrant kids. Like they've never done it before. Obviously, it's teaching is somewhat similar around the world, but there's certain like things they have to do, such as like I think you was saying the names, like the pronunciations, and it was always felt like they didn't really understand what we sort of were going through. So it was kind of up to the kids themselves to form their own communities. And that's exactly what we did. A lot of the Asian kids did stick together, and we created, now we create our own nonprofits and our own communities. And that's like the resource that helped me the most through finding my racial identity was my peers.
Thanks, man. It's really powerful.
I think something that played a significant role for me coming to the States and feeling kind of just questioning what exactly is my identity here. I had a professor that grew up in Hawaii, and she was half Japanese and half German. So she was also biracial and also grew up, well, Hawaii has a different culture than like the mainland in America. So like her cultural identity and her understanding of what it meant for her to be a biracial woman of color and a professor at a really small Christian school. Um, Her presence was something that even though I don't have a lot of like interactions with her, like her being there and being represented and like using her platform to create a space and a safe place for people of multiple backgrounds, like it just like made it feel slightly better that I'm not completely alone, and like the feelings that I might feel aren't alone, and like that was really helpful for me to have representation of someone who I could relate to, with the understanding of like how do I deal with the past of what white history is and the European imperialism and colonization, and dealing with what is happening in the world, even especially in this year of 2020 with Black Lives Matter and those social movements, and how to feel as an Asian person with even understanding and acknowledging that one of the police officers was Asian as well in the scene. Um, so like that was very important for me, and the representation meant everything to me. And we also had a class, it's where it emphasized on minority history in America. And like it was really important for me to kind of understand what it's like for Asian Americans living in the States, or um, African Americans and Latin Americans, and like the struggles that they went through, and like understanding that. And because being grouped, oftentimes being grouped in the same group of minority Americans, it was helpful to understand their history and just seeking out information about what their experiences were.
Joy.
Speaking of myself, I think there are two instances that help me kind of figure out myself. First is when I was given the chance to complete my senior thesis on the classroom experience of Chinese international students at Boston College. That was very great for me to just kind of listen to others and then do my own research on it. And another term is when I was in my senior year of my college, I was in a student TED Talk competition about resilience, and I kind of talk about my name identity confusion that I just mentioned earlier, and that was very powerful in ways that, as Nora saying, is storytelling, how it helps me to kind of convey the message and then kind of getting the support from the audience, and it kind of come in a full circle because that was after my 7 years of being in the U.S. That I feel more comfortable talking about it. But in terms of more systematic or school-wise, I resonate with Finn that I do not feel a lot of support as a Chinese international student in high school and on campus in undergraduate. My advisors, they're all white, and one thing that I struggle a lot is how having them to understand some of the struggles that I have. My high school advisor was the one that I think I have most support from, and I really that's why I want. But she's lacking the cultural understanding of something that I struggle with. That's why I kind of want to. That's why I want to be a counselor and being in a graduate school, to be the cultural broker, like a cultural, more culturally diverse counselor for other students in the futures.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jinyi, and all the students for, again, just opening up your stories and sharing with us what has been helpful and also what you kind of wish would have been there for support. And I think that kind of leads to our last question. What kind of things do you wish your teachers understood about you in order to have been more supported? I know we probably have touched a little bit on this topic, but if you can tangibly maybe think of a few concrete ways that even for our audience, that they can really kind of take away with to see these are ways that I can practically and tangibly help and support my students. That would be our last question for today.
Yeah, so I'll start again. I would say that just really checking in on them to see how they're doing, because a lot of Asian American students tend to be very quiet, reserved, and the American culture is, raise your hand when you need help or come to me if you need something, but that's not in their like home culture. So like reach out to them, be like, hey, are you understanding the material? And if not, do you need me to go over it with you in private if you don't want to be like more comfortable in the classroom of saying it? And another one is that like if a student comes up to you and says like, they're making fun of me, don't brush it off, because when I was in elementary school, I got bullied and I was like a walking stereotype because I was small, I was Asian, and I did Kung Fu. And I went to my teacher and I asked him, can you make them stop? And he just told me that they're poking fun at me. And in order to not be like bullied constantly, I ridiculed myself. I made self-deprecating jokes in order to like quote unquote fit in. And I really internalized all of the racism that I inflicted on myself. And it took me a long time to recover from that. So, listen to your students and really investigate it. Even if like, it's not like, if you don't think it's like probable, still look into it and see like if there's anything they can do.
Yeah, so for me, I've never really felt othered at Gordon College. So it was mainly because of the professors at Gordon College. They are really nice and they really take the time to treat everyone equally and always mention, like every professor always talks about, if you ever need um like to ask me a question, or um you could just get coffee with me. And it was like that easy. Like each professor would always be open to just grabbing coffee one-on-ones. And so it was very evident that professors are there, the professors at Gordon were just there to see you grow and see you flourish and do the best you can at college. So they were just making themselves always available, which really meant a lot to
Mm.
me, not just me, to all of the international students at Gordon College. Um, Made us feel safe and welcome, and knew that if we ever had any issues in any of our classes, big or small, we could just always go up to them. And so, yeah.
Mhm. So one thing I'd have to say on this is that I don't know how many other people have an experience with this, but when it comes to separating class by like intelligence, that's happened to me since 6th grade. We've had something called like the SUMA program. And the thing is that the SUMA program was generally Asian. Like I want to say almost 90% of it was Asian students.
Mhm.
And the thing is that when you do something like that at such a young age and you tell a kid that they're smarter than normal and that they're smarter than most people, this creates sort of like a almost like an ego in them, right? So that it made me as a child think, I'm smarter, so I shouldn't have to ask for help. And that asking for help is like losing because I don't want to lose my spot in this like hierarchy of students, right? But once that caught up with me and I was taking smarter classes that I couldn't just breathe through, I fell behind a little bit and because I was scared to ask for help. I was scared to be uh, like sort of like let my defense down and actually say I need help with this. So I think just being separated at such a young age, and then some of my teachers were a little bit ignorant in the classroom when it comes to different cultures. And because I was Asian, that doesn't mean I need help, or doesn't mean that I don't need help.
Mm.
And yeah, that's kind of something that I wish my teachers knew, was that just because I had a head start above compared to some other kids doesn't mean that I don't need the same treatment that they do.
I feel like something that's really important is just trying to, like, as much as as people who study like history, like if you study any kind of history, it's basically very Eurocentric. I think understanding history from different points of view and different perspectives would allow you to gain perspective of what your Asian American or international student are going through, and like the culture that they come from, and that it's not the student's responsibility to educate you guys, but as educators it is your role to be educate yourselves in what is important to the student and what would gear students to be successful in the classroom. So I think understanding our culture plays a huge role in that.
I resonate with what Finn and Thomas just said about asking for help, and I think I have to sum up. For me, is I wish my teachers and others know that it's not always easy and normal for me to ask for help, but please let us know that no matter what we do and where we are, they're here for us. That's very powerful for me. And then also another thing is, I guess, incorporate different perspective and voices from different cultures, either in class or at school or just in day-to-day conversations.
Thank you again for sharing all of your stories. We'll transition into a brief Q&A. And so for the next 10 minutes, if you have any questions for the students, feel free to utilize the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar to type in your question, and we'll take some time to answer them. All right, so we have one question, and feel free to jump in. And any of you guys can feel free to jump in. The question is, how do you deal with the president calling the coronavirus such disrespectful names? So kind of touching on, kind of touching on the racial connotations and like acts of discrimination that have come with the coronavirus.
I guess in my opinion on it, there has been histories of just calling flus. I mean, there was like the Spanish flu of 1920s, and like there's just been such a history of just calling certain certain viruses based off of the location. And I think that that just has to stop and just change. It's not necessary because of especially the discrimination that comes and the hate that has brought towards the Asian community all around the world. So I think it's just something that as history as continues, we have to stop naming things after the Spanish flu or the Hong Kong flu or the Chinese virus, or it's just ending up with more hate than anything, I think.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, in the chat, I just heard a question: does it make you like worry more about being discriminated against? And I'd say yes, but even more so that recently they've been targeting the elderly population of the Asian American community, and that has me even more worried about my grandparents who like shouldn't be going out, but sometimes need to actually go out for groceries or whatnot. And if they're going to be okay just doing their everyday tasks while like they don't even speak English, so they don't know what's happening, and it's very worrisome, it's very stressful, and it makes me very distrustful of a lot of people just outside.
I can answer the question that was asked by Wen Sailor. What role did affinity or Asian culture groups or clubs play in your identity development if your school had them? I think they definitely do play a role of just creating a place of comfort for students. And it does play into identity because at college, if you're not seeing enough of yourself and you're not surrounding yourself with people that look like you tend to develop like identity issues. Like you ask yourself, am I good enough, am I pretty enough, or am I is something wrong with me, I look really different. Like you start asking yourself questions like that and like start to have anxiety and like your confidence goes low, which I kind of did feel some of that. But I think it's really important to surround yourself with people that look like you and make you feel good about yourself and that know you well, that so that they can just feed life into you rather than like making you feel other 24/7. So yeah.
Yeah, just to, if I could add on to that, Jessica, I definitely understand what you're saying by surrounding yourself with people that you somewhat look like. So, as someone who is biracial, it was very awkward when I go to Japan and then these people see me as like, you know, kid from America, he's not like us. And then I live in America and then, you know, this kid is Japanese, he's kind of not like the rest of us. And then it was this very awkward period in my life where I just wanted to be one or the other. And I didn't realize that I could just be myself and that I'm mixing, I don't have to fit into one or another culture because Japanese Americans and people who are half Japanese, half American, or half any kind of Asian and American, they have their own culture. And our own culture is the mixing of those two cultures. And then finally going on in school and meeting other kids that are like me was really comforting, knowing that they had the same experience that I did.
I could speak a little bit about the name and identity questions that I see in the chat. I will first say when I stopped using my English name Brittany when I started this year as a graduate student at Harvard, probably because I took a gap year last year and then it was a good time and I came back to China and I heard people calling me my real name in China. So it was more like now or not. It's like I started my graduate school and my faculty and my peers at Harvard are very, very supportive. And I see a lot more of my Chinese peers using their given name. So I just give it a try and I talked to my professors about it and they were very supportive about it. And that's why I started using it. But still, I had my Brittany identity in me. So that's why I will use both names now. And another thing is how I think the school, how do I help and assist my teacher to pronounce my name correctly? One thing that my college did for the teachers is they have a workshop for pronouncing names from different cultures. But another thing that I didn't think of in my personal experience is just the effort to kind of pronounce it in the first class of the year, because that was the class that showed that you respect and you pay attention. So if you try to kind of ask like, can you tell me to pronounce it again, or just ask it after class, that makes a huge difference. And that the first class makes me want to kind of stick with my real name or not my real name afterward. And why did I not choose to use my Asian name at first? It's, as I said before, I want to kind of blend in, and I feel like at a young age, I feel like it's cool to have an English name and just having the ability to give myself an English name that people can speak and easier to pronounce it. So yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you, Jingyi, for sharing. We have a lot of questions coming in. We'll go with how represented do you feel in the racial and social justice movement? Do you feel part of it, or do you feel that many organizations and companies are ignoring Asian Americans? Take a few moments to think on that.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Honestly, from just what I've seen around, I really don't feel that represented. I think, you know, we have, you know, the social justice movement and they're fighting against all kinds of racism, but I do feel that Asians are overlooked because the model minority myth, as we mentioned earlier, is still looked at that Asians are hardworking, they're already like established and they're rich and all these sort of things, that they're all smart. And I think that makes people kind of look at this, be like, oh, they don't need help or anything sort of like that, you know, while, you know, you can look in the news and still see that they're like youth, like kids are out here attacking Asian elderly because they're like, oh, you started the coronavirus, you know, you spread it to us, or all of that kind of stuff. So I do think that Asians are overlooked, but I think that as the social justice movement keeps going and the Black Lives Matter movement keeps going, that eventually like these problems will come to the surface, and then that we'll finally be talking about it in like mass media.
I want to add on to that a little bit with, as Finn mentioned, the model minority myth. And there's a lot of like anti-Black sentiment in the Asian American community, or just the Asian community in general. And then there's a lot of anti-Asian sentiment in the Black community. And it really touches upon because the origin of the model minority myth was it was propaganda during the civil rights movement to really put down Black civil rights like like uh, sorry, activists. That's right. And the sentiment has still gone on and it's still going very strong right now. And so while I feel like, and like, personally, I've had to like talk to people and educate people about how like, you know, like the Black Lives Matter movement affects us too, because we're minorities as well. Like just because we're not dealing with the same, like, it's not like a racism Olympics where one is like more severely affected. It's that we're all being oppressed because we're all in the same like systemic racism. Like we're all dealing with the systemic racism. So like while yes, like Asians are overlooked right now, personally, I feel like the another issue needs to be addressed like first, which is the the police brutality, and then the prison systems, and then like the government and like the whole thing. So there's a lot of intersectionality. So I feel like right now, like we're not being represented as much, and I'm okay with that. But moving forward, yes, as Finley said, we need to be addressing the same issues, and we need to be like everyone needs to be on the same page that Asian Americans are still minorities.
Thanks so much for sharing, Finn and Thomas. We'll go to our next question. What would you tell your younger selves with all the things you know and experiences you've had now?
I would say to have thick skin, because there can be a lot of people that can misunderstand you, and to not let that get to you, and to always like know where you come from and be proud of where you're from. I would just say that.
I feel like for me, something that I would tell my younger self would be, don't be afraid to explore the different aspects of your um, own identity, and it's okay to click the other. I mean, it's not the best to click the other box, but it's okay to embrace what the other represents in you, and that through being a biracial person, you're able to gain perspectives from two different cultures, and being able to understand those cultures. And through that, you'll have a deeper understanding of what the world is. And that would also help motivate you to understand other people's culture. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing, Joy. We have a lot of questions, so I'll move on to the next one. It says, at my school, Asian students often reference getting an A- or B+ as an Asian fail. What would you have liked to hear and see that the teachers say or do to counter the pressure of these statements create?
Well, if to speak on this, I think a lot of the pressure comes from our parents. I think we can all agree on that. But I think, when a teacher gives a student a grade, most of the time they're being fair. And a lot of times they don't understand really what's going on at home. And, like if someone did a work that's worth a B-, then you have to give them a B-. I'm not saying like, like curve them up or anything. But I think that maybe, it should be acknowledged in the classroom that having an A isn't always, you don't always need to have an A, and that maybe students should talk to their parents and say that, hey, this class is a little bit hard for me. And even though I have a B, that's still passing, that's still getting certain things right. I'm still going to pass the class. I'm still going to go to the next grade. I'm still going to get the credit. So I think, especially for Asians, just getting these not exactly not subpar, but just something that's not an A is okay, because a lot of my peers still think it's not okay, even though it really is.
Thanks, Ben. We'll have time for maybe 2 more questions. Next question is, I work at a K through 12 school with international students, mostly from China and Asian American students of various backgrounds. I'm a faculty advisor of the Asian Student Affinity Group. I often feel like there's a disconnect with Asian Chinese international students and Asian American students. How could I bridge this gap, and what kind of activities or conversations can I facilitate with? So maybe some from the international students you can hear.
I would say it's particularly hard, even for my own experience, because even though we are the same we're coming from the same culture, we have very different experience as international student and someone who grows up in America but with an Asian identity. You almost cannot first it's hard that you could not group us together because we essentially are different cultures, right? Because growing up in China and growing up in the US, there's different cultural norms, even though we're in the household, we may be in the same. So I don't know, maybe even asking the students what they can resonate with each other, or yeah, I kind of struggle with this one a lot too.
Thanks for sharing, Jingy. And our last question. Sorry, we have a lot of questions, but for the sake of time, this will be the last question that we answer. Can you speak on the challenge of not being seen as people of color due to statistic that don't group Asians in the same category as Black, Latinx, and Native people? Maybe Thomas, would you like to speak on this one a little bit?
Yeah, I can talk about it. I feel like when people don't regard Asians as minorities, it kind of really downplays all the struggles that they go through. Like my parents, no, yes, both my parents are refugees from Vietnam, from the Vietnam War, and we came here with just about nothing. And we had to deal with racism. We had to deal with the unfair opportunities that other people got that we didn't, but we still persevered and we got through it. And I know there are a lot of other Asian Americans too who have gone through the exact same thing. But had we been white, it would have been much easier. Or actually, okay, I'm not gonna say too much about that, but we had a lot of struggles because we're Asian. And when someone says that you're not Asian and that you don't experience the racism, again, it's not a racism Olympics. It's not a competition. We were there were prejudices against us that barred us from opportunities as well. Maybe not severe in one extent, but certainly in another. So I feel like when someone says, you're not a minority, then what's the issue what's all the struggles that we went through before? Where's my white privilege that would have made my life personally so much easier? So, yeah.
Thank you for speaking on that, Thomas. I'm sorry, we do have a lot of questions, but for the sake of time, we'll move on to our next activity. But I hope you can hold on to your questions, and maybe through email or through our website, we'll be able to correspond with different resources that might be helpful to the audience. So thank you so much for the student panelists. I'll give you guys a virtual round of applause. I'm sure the audience is so thankful to have entered into your stories and just leaned into what you had to share today. So thank you so much for the student panelists. Now I'm going to invite Nora back up to lead us into a response activity on how we can better support students that we are part of, in the schools that we are part of. And so I'll invite Nora back up into leading us into an activity.
Great, thank you so much. I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody to sort of say, wow, that's really impressive. All these different insights and wisdom that so many of you talked about, and it really spoke to me as well. I was sort of sitting here going, wow, inside. So please hang in there. for this last part, because I also know, and I can see on the comments and the kind of questions you're asking and some of the comments that you've been sending to the panelists privately, that many of you have a lot to give and have been trying a lot in your school. So now we're going to kind of move to this point where we have a Padlet, and a Padlet is kind of like an electronic sticky note exercise where we wanted to hear from you. We wanted an opportunity for you to share a little bit about what's happening at your schools and what you're finding helpful, because, you know, I think that idea of kind of expanding this network, expanding this idea of sharing our resources is really important. So in order to participate, if you're new to the Padlets, you can just click on the link in the chat and go over to that, and then you're actually going to sort of see, for me at least, it's a pink plus button at the bottom. And the question in the prompt is, what are things that you are doing or could be doing in your schools to better support the needs of Pan-Asian students? So if you can go ahead and hit plus and go ahead and add in some of your own comments about what are things that you're already doing, or as you're hearing and inspired by the different panelists, what are some of the things that they've said that you feel like, okay, you know, I want to do more of that. And again, most of the comments are anonymous, but it's fine if you want to share a little bit more specific of your institution. I'm just going to give you a moment to kind of add in those different things, and we can kind of get a sense of And just as people are writing in their different comments and they're populating, I just earlier, Hannah had mentioned that I helped to start this Pan-Asian Wellness Initiative network. And part of that was because I think there are a lot of people in schools. I mean, where that network is really for independent schools, but I think all over there are schools that are trying to make an effort. However, I think we're pretty disjointed. We're not always networked. We're not as, I think, as good about sharing those resources. And so part of the planning process, we felt like we really wanted to be able to share that so that you can kind of come back with some concrete things. So as that's populating, I know there was a lot of discussion about names, and I just wanted to touch base a little bit about that in particular as just a concrete example of how important it is that when we're thinking about things that schools can do, that we really think about interventions at three areas. And I think the panelists spoke about ways that individual teachers or individuals in their lives have really given them that space to be heard, to have their different aspects of who they are. I think it was Thomas sort of saying, you know, it was just helpful to find a guidance counselor who really kind of understood some of these unique aspects of who he is and how valuable it is. So it's important to think about, how are we thinking about training or providing resources for individuals, regardless of their particular background, to be able to share their experiences and to share their knowledge so that students have those resources. It's also important to think about what are some of the institutional pieces that we can put in place. And then also what are things like the institutional things that they talked about, the panelists talked about how important it is to have classes that reflect either the Asian experience or the Asian American experience. And again, that's something that I think a lot of schools can do more on. And then there's these cultural aspects, and the name part is just one of those examples that I think can really come up for how powerful it is when students will talk about how they feel pressure. Often it isn't that somebody sort of says, you need to change your name, but it isn't uncommon. And actually a lot of people were writing to the panelists about how they could relate to this pressure to change your name to a more American sounding name. And when I've talked to students, they'll often sort of talk about how they're doing that because they want to make it easier for their teachers. And, I think we all can agree how valuable a name is towards someone's identity and having pride in that. So one of the things that my school, I think it took us a long time actually to do, but I think one of the ways that we tried to shift that culture was, one, to talk about it as a larger school, about the importance of choice, that students can change their name. That's certainly that's something that they should be empowered to do if they decide they want to go by a different name other than their given name. But if they're doing it because they want to make it easier for others, because they want to make it easier for the teachers, they want to kind of avoid these moments when someone's saying their name incorrectly, that we could do something about that. And so what we did as an institution to sort of shift that culture is that we used a resource called Name Coach. And every student in the school and every adult was encouraged or is encouraged to record their name. And actually, if you saw my name I have a name, because my last name is often mispronounced or misspelled. And so there's actually a link where you can actually hear my name. So at our school, you can go into a database and you can actually click on somebody's name so that you can take the individual, other people, take the responsibility to learn how to say that person's name, as just one example. And I just want to say that as I'm talking, wow, there's just a lot of different resources, and it's going to take us all a really long time to be able to share and look through all these great things, but that's a good problem to have. A couple of things I just want to highlight as we're finishing up is how many times I heard the idea of representation coming up, and someone was writing in to the panelists talking about how they were really trying, how it's hard to recruit, faculty or adults who are of Asian descent in their schools. And it's really important sometimes to sort of be able to name that that's a need, and then to think about, the question maybe, which is, how can we do that? And it may not be easy, but once we ask the question, it means it's possible, and more possibilities can occur from that. And so, I think that things that came up around professional development trainings. I know in my school, I asked somebody who'd been there for quite a long time, I think about 25 years. And I said, when was the last time we had our professional development on the topic of either Asian American experience? And the answer was it never had happened. And so that's something that, again, how can we bring somebody of Asian descent to talk about these different topics in our school? Sometimes I know there was a bunch of questions about what can you do or what should you do if you can't have people of all these different experiences to be able to do that representation, to do that mirroring, as I talked about earlier. And I had a student who self-identified as Korean American, and she was really wanting to explore her queer identity more significantly. And I self-identify as heterosexual, so it was an area that we could talk about it, but the nuances and the mirroring that she was looking for, I was not able to do that. And we didn't have anybody in our community that she could find those resources. And so again, when I asked the question to myself about what can we do about that, what became clear was it needs to happen. And so we could look to outside speakers to come in. And I looked to some mentors that I have who does have that intersecting identity, who could be a resource, who is willing to help out. And so I think once we can identify that those needs are there, then we can begin to sort of think about how we can meet those needs better. But again, I just want to go to my opening remarks, which was about if we continue to allow for the invisibility, for the silence of the needs of the Pan-Asian community to not be heard, we can't move forward as a community. And it's not just about meeting the needs of the students, individual students, but it really helps the entire institution, the entire school culture. When the Pan-Asian experience is not part of the narrative, I do think we all lose out. And so part of that, I think, is really, again, beginning to think about what are the questions. So as the resources, I can see they're still popping in. I know that we're coming to kind of a close here. Boy, I don't know if we can fit it in there. Hannah, maybe, or you and others can sort of help. I don't know if we can still put it on there, but I was interested in just having people, maybe you can put it in the chat if it's too complicated, because there are so many great resources in the Padlet, to maybe put in the chat, what are you kind of, as you kind of pause, what are some of the questions that you're leaving with? What are some of your lingering questions that are going to help be the seeds for you to do more reflection and then taking action in the future? So I think it'd be helpful for us to sort of be able to see, so if you can do panelists and attendees, maybe in the chat, because we were going to put it in the Padlet, but the Padlet is wonderfully getting populated there. So what are some questions? So again, again, it could be a question, how can I do a better job of getting a wider range of faculty or staff or administrators at my school who have better training in understanding the Asian American experience? And that's one of the things that I've been thinking more about. What are some of your questions? What are some of the things that you are going to sort of be wanting to take away? So if you can put that in your chat. As we're kind of talking about that piece, I just also wanted to sort of provide another sort of recommendation for a lot of schools who don't have affinity groups yet, because I think the students were talking about how valuable groups can be. I think that this idea of kind of affinity gatherings, so sometimes at our school, to start a new club is kind of a complicated process, but I think it was Finn who was talking about how he got together, the peers got together. And, I think that just creating an opportunity to kind of bring students together. So right now, in my school, we really need to do a lot more work in engaging students of South Asian descent. And so I just reached out to some students to say, would you like to do an affinity gathering to gather with other people of South Asian descent to talk a little bit about their experiences, to do some of that validating and contrasting opportunities. So, again, one of those things is, how can I better meet the needs of our students and provide affinity spaces? So I think we're sort of finishing up, Hannah, here. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your different comments. Boy, I wonder, again, hopefully everybody can continue to have time later to look through the Padlet. That'll sort of stay open, right, for people to be able to go through it.
Yep. Yep, thank you so much, Nora, for leading us into that activity. And yep, like she shared, feel free to save and take this Padlet with you, and you can read over it and in your own time and be able to think about like different specific ways that we can continue supporting our students. And in the chat, I can see a lot of main takeaways from the seminar, which is great. And yeah, so this marks the end of our webinar today. We just want to thank our student panelists. You can turn on your videos, and our Let's Talk team and Nora and so many students who've submitted their responses for the video that we watched earlier. And we also just want to thank all of you just for taking the time in your weekend to just learn more about how we can better support your students. An accompanying fact sheet on the topics that we were covered today will be posted on our Let's Talk website. So the link will be posted on the chat. So feel free to access that resource. And after the webinar, you'll also receive a short survey by email. And if you can fill that out, that would be really great feedback for us. Our next webinar is actually happening tomorrow at 7 to 8:30 p.m. EST on supporting Asian American youth in academic and career decision making. This is a wonderful event. We would love to see you there, and you can also register on our website and our other social media platforms. And lastly, I know there were a lot of unanswered questions today, or maybe some questions that have been brought up by the student stories that were shared. So we actually have an upcoming professionals conference for educators and clinicians, and it's on supporting the emotional wellness of Asian and Asian American students, and continuing education credits will be available. So we hope that you can join us. Registration will open soon after the new year. And so just keep tabs on our social media platforms and also our website, and we hope that we can join us and see you there. And so with that, we'll conclude our webinar. Thank you so much for your time and participation today. You guys can turn on your videos for student panelists too, and we can say our final goodbye.
All right, thank you for having me for this event. It was really great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks so much for just being willing to listen to our experiences. And it's been great even just hearing other students' experiences and the different things that we could relate to. Yeah. Thank you, Hannah and Nora.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a good night or a good morning wherever you are in part of the world today.